a truck driver can often be a lonely job when you're out there on the open road where anything is possible. Well, for the folks featured in the following stories, that's just what they experienced: loneliness, uncertainty, and some high strangeness. Here's a few more isolated trucker experiences that'll make you rethink everything you may think you know about the highways that keep us connected all over the US. So here you go. Story 1. My experience is more strange than it is scary, but I suppose that just depends on how you look at it. Well, late one night, while driving my company's bright red, brand new Peterbilt across Highway 30 in Iowa, I saw something that made me see the world in a much different way. I must have been somewhere between Des Moines and Omaha, near the small town of Jefferson. There was a fresh layer of snow that accumulated on the road, reminding all drivers to take it slow and easy. Traffic was light that night, and a major storm was forecasted for the following several days. I was headed east on my way to Lyons, Illinois, not far from Chicago, to deliver a load of company material, with a solid 5.5 hour drive ahead of me. Well, I'm one of those weird truckers who likes to decorate my truck while out on the road, especially during the holidays. Well, a few days previous, I had mounted a set of fake antlers on the roof of my rig and attempted to create a nose just above the grill with some red Christmas lights. You know, the classic Rudolph look. But it ended up looking more like something out of a bad dream. My coworkers all thought it was a clown with antlers, but that's beside the point. So let's get into the experience. It must have been around 10 or 11 p.m. when I passed through Jefferson on that cold and quiet night. At one point, I pulled over in front of a seemingly abandoned farmhouse to check on a few things and to secure the rear trailer gate before continuing on. But as I did so, I noticed another trucker approaching from the opposite direction, heading west. But there was something about that oncoming truck that made me do a double take. It too was bright red, was a newer Peterbilt model, and he too had decorated his truck with a set of antlers on the roof and attempted the same nose job with red Christmas lights. Even though it was dark, the truck's night lights were more than enough for me to make out those details. But as he drew near, he slowed his roll as if trying to get a better look at me. Yes, plenty of truckers decorated their trucks in similar ways, but this was downright identical to mine. And when I could finally see the driver through his window, well, my jaw hit the floor, and from the looks of it, so did his. He wore a red flannel, green cap, and had a beard as long as the Mississippi, just like I did. But instead of tipping our hats to one another or giving a horn's hello, we just sort of looked at each other, and this strange feeling washed over me. It was not only the feeling of bewilderment, but also a sense of familiarity. With my hand still gripping the trailer door, I was frozen as I watched the trucker roll on by and eventually disappear around the corner. We both shared the same reaction, and in that very moment, time had stood still. Had I just seen my doppelganger, or was this some kind of strange coincidence? Well, I sort of brushed it off as so, and continued on my little journey east. But it gets stranger. Not more than a couple days later, as I was making my return trip west, I arrived back at Jefferson at around 10 or 11 p.m., just like the other night. And when I reached the outskirts of town, that strange feeling washed over me again. Up ahead, I saw another truck that had pulled off to the side of the road in front of an old farmhouse, and then it clicked. And that's exactly where I pulled over when I first saw my trucking twin. As I slowed to get a better look, I noticed the set of antlers and red lights exactly where I had placed mine. Everything about it was eerily identical. The driver was standing near the rear of the trailer, holding onto the back door handles, watching me as I slowly rolled on by. And he too was the same. Everything from the red flannel, green hat, and long-ass beard. And I can tell he was surprised as I was. Once again, we locked eyes and our jaws hit the floor. I guess the weirdest part about this whole experience was how we just sorta stared at each other without a single greeting or gesture. It was like we were forbidden to do so, a gut instinct that told me to keep moving on and not to stop and acknowledge the guy. So I guess from what I gather here, I was both the trucker on that shoulder and the trucker driving by him. I saw myself literally from two different perspectives and two different times. Logic told me the first time was just a coincidence, but when it happened again, that same logic took a 180 and jumped out the window. This was definitely spooky, but also kind of cool at the same time as I look back on it. But then again, I'm just one of those weird truckers. I hope to see similar stories that folks may have had in the comments section. Hats off to you, Rusty, and thanks. Weirdo Wayne. Story 2. Last January, I was making my way from Redding, California to Reno, Nevada, when my big rig broke down just outside of an old, nearly abandoned town called Doyle. Apparently, the load of lumber I was hauling proved to be too much for the company's timber lorry, which had seen better days and its fair share of service requests over the last couple years or so. Well, I just so happened to break down in the late hours of the night, which explains why it took me forever to actually get through to the company's sleepy dispatch unit. I described the issue as best I could. A grinding noise under the hood, followed by a stack of smoke that surrounded me on that tiny sliver of highway. Hold tight, someone will be there within the hour, the dispatcher said in a grumpy tone. This was, of course, after we concluded the issue could not be resolved without the help of a service mechanic. After ending the phone call, I turned off the ignition and stepped out of my rig to set up some hazard cones. After that, I leaned up against the butt of the trailer and waited. It was cold and quiet now, but at least I was out of the smoky cab and getting some fresh air. Off in the distance, I could see the tiny, faded lights of the homes that scarcely dotted the landscape. But other than that, complete and utter darkness. I kept my brake lights on so I wouldn't be completely invisible out there, as I knew a vehicle could swing on by at any moment. But I was far enough off the road that it wouldn't be a problem. As I continued to analyze the situation, my thought process was broken by the sound of a creaking metal door. I knew this wasn't just the sound of hot metal cooling and contracting, as the engine had been off for around 30 minutes or so by this point. This was the sound of a squeaky passenger side door that I had personally opened and closed 100 times before. I knew that sound. I immediately shot a glance around the corner, only to see the passenger door wide open as the light from the cab poured out into the darkness. But in that light was a shadow of something moving vigorously inside that cab. Something skinny, lengthy, and bony. And even though I couldn't actually see it, the shadow of it was quite unsettling, and I felt a sinking feeling in my gut. I had nothing to protect myself with if this thing decided to attack. I was armed with a phone and a pocket full of change, probably the worst thing I could have in my pocket while trying to remain stealthy and quiet. I honestly don't think it knew I was back there, because the erratic behavior it was making told me otherwise. The creature, or whatever it was thrashing around inside, digging through my clothes and personal belongings. I decided to take this opportunity to get off the ground and elevate myself, as I knew I just might have to if this thing decided to come looking for me. And that is exactly what it would do just seconds after I carefully and quietly scaled the top of those logs in the back of my trailer. At this point, I had positioned myself flat on my back to remain as hidden as possible. I could hear it now, huffing and puffing, as if it were trying to follow my scent. I wanted so badly to turn and see what this thing was. But if it had the ability to open my passenger door and jump inside, it was probably something I wouldn't want to mess with. I knew it wasn't a person, and I also knew it wasn't a wild animal or anything else I could think of. That eerie shadow had already confirmed that. At this point, I had already given up on what I thought it could be, and just focused on remaining quiet. That was until some of the loose change in my pocket fell out and into the spaces between the logs. It was the sound of me giving away my position, and I knew it garnered this thing's attention. I heard it snort and let out a deep, low growl, which made its way closer to my side of the truck. In a split-second decision, I grabbed what loose change remained in my pocket and flung it over my head onto the highway, relieved by the sound of metal landing on asphalt. After an agonizing moment of silence, I could hear it moving away and out toward the road, sniffing and snorting as it did so. As the creature examined the coins, I heard the distant sound of another truck approaching from the west. I slowly turned my head to face the direction of where I thought the creature might have been, and that's when I caught a glimpse of it as the oncoming truck's headlights illuminated a strange-looking figure on all fours that didn't appear much different than the shadow I had seen earlier. That only confirmed that what I had witnessed out there on that cold January night was something straight out of a nightmare. Well, the truck approached, but this thing was long gone by the time it rolled on by, and it took everything in me from leaving my position to try and flag down for help, as I was uncertain how much longer the service mechanic would take. When he finally arrived about 15 minutes later, I cautiously climbed down the logs and scanned my surroundings in the event the creature was still nearby. But as far as I knew, it appeared to be gone. I grappled with the decision to share my frightening encounter with the mechanic, but there's no way in hell he or anyone else would believe it. So I told him I had seen a mountain lion nearby, and that we needed to be aware and hurry up to fix the damn problem. The man agreed, and it only took him a minute for him to find the issue. A blown head gasket and a major oil leak, something that would require hours of work. But the good news was, the company decided to set me up in a hotel room at the River Inn in Susanville while the mechanics dealt with the issue. As I went to retrieve my belongings, I could now see the full scope of mayhem this thing created during its wild attempt to find me. And it stank in there, not just from the smoke of the engine, but like really bad breath. I grabbed what little clean clothes I could find and left with the mechanic in his truck. I was never so relieved to leave that area as I was that night. The repairs were done the following morning, and I was allowed to continue my haul, but not before cleaning the hell out of my cab and sterilizing it. When I made my delivery in Reno that afternoon, I requested a new truck and a new assignment. Since then, no more isolated hauls between Reno and Redding, and I was cool with that. Well, that's my experience. Thanks for sharing my story. C.J. Wallace. Story 3. One cold and sunny afternoon, I stopped at an off-ramp in Missouri to stretch out and take a little breather, and by that I mean fire up a cigarette and enjoy a lukewarm cup of coffee. This stretch of road was pretty remote, and there was nothing but empty ranch land for as far as the eye could see. Well, as I'm taking in the views, a little girl from nowhere emerges from behind my truck and begins giggling, completely catching me off guard and causing me to spit out my coffee. My initial reaction was, what in the hell is a child doing all the way out here in the middle of nowhere? Before I could respond, the girl says, "Hi, mister. You're going to be okay. Don't worry." Now utterly confused, I asked her what she meant by this, but she didn't respond. She just stood there with her arms behind her back and kept giggling. She must have been around 8 or 9 years young, wore a garden green dress and a pair of brown rain boots. Expecting her parents to be nearby, I looked from side to side and all around me in every conceivable direction. "Where are your parents?" I asked as I turned back to look at her. But the very spot that she had been standing on seconds before was empty, and there was no more giggling. I hurried over to my truck, looked under and all around it, and even inside. She was nowhere to be seen. She just vanished into thin air, leaving me completely perplexed and with a road full of questions. You can imagine my thought process as I quickly finished my cigarette and left. For a long while, that little girl's statement replayed itself in my thoughts. "You're going to be okay. Don't worry." Later on down the road, I realized I forgot to gas up at my last stop when the warning light on my fuel gauge came on. So I scrambled to look at my GPS for the nearest service station. It was about 32 miles away. I knew quite well that I wouldn't make it that far before running out of gas, but I had to try. Well, to my amazement, I actually did it. As I rolled up to the truck stop, my rig began to sputter and the engine began to die. I ran out of fuel right as I got to the pump. What were the odds of this? By now, the cold night temperatures had moved in, but even so, I felt a warmth, reminding me of what that little girl had told me at my previous stop. I can't explain how she appeared out of nowhere, only to disappear just as quickly. Was she some kind of spirit or guardian angel? Well, I'm not sure about that, but the whole thing brings a smile to my face when I think about it to this day. Gearhead Gary. Story 4. I was headed west on I-76 here in Denver, cruising along at about 65 miles per hour in my flatbed tractor trailer on a dark and snowy January night. The snow had just picked up within the last hour or so, and what was supposed to be a 2.5-hour haul ended up taking around 4 hours or so by the time I reached my destination. I deliver vehicles for a living, all kinds of them. On this particular run, I was delivering a fresh supply of cars to Enterprise in Laramie, Wyoming. I had 7 vehicles on the trailer, 2 Kias, 3 Camrys, a Corolla, and a RAV4. Half of these were brand new, while the others were previously rented out. With there being so many Enterprise locations, it's not uncommon for large shipments of cars to be allocated between branches based on their demand. Well, on that quiet and seemingly routine night, I noticed something bizarre about one of these cars. I first noticed it while glancing at the rear view mirror, and then again while I pulled off to the side of the interstate. The trailer was a double-decker, 4 cars on the bottom, 3 on the top. The blue Toyota RAV4 was situated near the front at the top, and was the first vehicle I saw when I looked out the back window. Well, as I was passing a series of well-lit billboards, I happened to glance into the rear view mirror to check on the vehicles. Something I did countless times, considering the payload I was hauling. But on this particular look, I saw something strange in that RAV4, as the front of it was positioned to face my back window. I saw a man sitting in the driver's side seat, peering out at the windshield and looking directly at me. I nearly spit out my coffee, as absolutely no one was supposed to be in those vehicles. As I passed under the lights of those billboards, I could see him for a split second each time I did so, illuminating what appeared to be the silhouette of a man in uniform. It was dim, but I could see the tan-colored military-style jacket he wore, and his dark hair appeared neat and parted to one side. But once I passed the boards, it was dark again, and I could no longer see the man. That's when I got the heebie-jeebies and immediately pulled over. Once I did, I grabbed my tire thumper and exited the truck. With my hazard lights flickering on and off, I could once again see the RAV4, but the man wasn't there. As I rounded both sides of the truck to see if the stranger had exited, I could see that he had not. The stowaway must have either ducked down or jumped into the back seat when he realized I could see him. Well, I climbed up the back of the trailer until I reached the top deck, where I began to slowly and cautiously examine each vehicle until I made my way to the RAV4. Even through its tinted windows, my cell phone light was able to illuminate the dark cavities of that car, and it was showcased spotless. Nothing or no one was inside. I proceeded to open the back door as the driver's side was inaccessible from my position. Again, I saw nothing as I physically examined the interior. But I had an eerie feeling with me in that car for the entire time, and I decided not to be in there any longer. I was stumped. Could he have gotten out without me actually noticing? Sure. I suppose he could have. Well, if he did, he could most certainly be anywhere out there in that dark or around my truck. But I didn't want to stay and find out. So I rushed back into the warmth and safety of my cab, locked the doors, buckled up and re-entered the highway, with my eyes staying glued to the mirrors. It would be another 10 minutes until I reached a well-lit area that gave me a clear look into that RAV4, and that's when I saw him again, sitting frozen in that driver's side seat, staring directly in my direction. The first time I could explain it as a stowaway, but the second time is what really got me, as I knew I had examined that vehicle several times, locked it up, and kept a watchful eye as well after I left the area. But there he was, sitting exactly where I had seen him before, uniform and all, looking lifeless as a porcelain doll. I felt my sweaty palms stick to the steering wheel as a wave of fear and disbelief came over me. Well, that's when I got on my phone and Googled the nearest police station and decided to pull in so they could have a look at it as well, and I could finally get the son of a gun out of there. Not long after, I pulled into a CHP office near Longmont and phoned in my situation. 2 officers met me out front as I pulled up, and the 3 of us conducted a thorough search of not only the RAV4, but all 7 vehicles. So if the 2 armed officers weren't enough to persuade the stranger to reveal himself, then I don't know what would. The 3 of us searched another 20 minutes or so, but there was no sign anyone was in those vehicles, or on the trailer for that matter. Besides, it was below freezing out there, and the fresh layer of snow that surrounded the truck was also left undisturbed. I felt a little relief knowing the officers confirmed that nobody was inside, but at the same time, I felt unnerved, not knowing where the man could have went in between stop A and stop B, with the 3 of us searching every conceivable area. I felt a chill come over me in that cab as I pulled away from the CHP station, and I realized I may have had my first genuine paranormal experience. That was the only way I could explain it, and I think the officers had the same feeling, though they didn't admit it. Did I see a ghost? I'd like to know the history of that RAV4, as it had around 25,000 miles on it, which told me it had been previously rented out. I never did see the stranger again, despite obsessively watching those mirrors all the way to Laramie. But I did contact the Enterprise office that I picked it up from to inquire about the history of the RAV4. But they weren't able to reveal much of anything, as these cars get shuffled around all the time. Was this car involved in an accident? Well, if it was, they didn't tell me. This was and is still one of the spookiest mysteries of my life, and I can't help but wonder if someone in the military lost their life in that vehicle, or was there a more logical, simpler explanation for the strange encounter? I guess I'll never really know, but maybe that's a good thing. Sincerely, Lyle Johnson. Story 5. The sun had just dropped below the horizon on that clear and crystal idle Tuesday evening as I sat comfortably in my classic Peterbilt. I had a full tank of gas, a several-hour stretch of road ahead of me, and a 20-ounce Americano I grabbed from what would be the last service station for 100 miles. My journey began in Dodge City, Kansas, and my destination would bring me all the way westward toward the Great Basin of Nevada and through US Route 50 in Utah. What would have been an otherwise smooth and routine drive ended up being more of a pain in the ass at first, and then it just got weird from there on out. All was good until I reached the 335-mile portion of the 50 that is dubbed the quote, loneliest road in America, as it is one of the least traveled highways in the country. This was actually my first time through it, but I had researched it several times prior to my run, so I would be a bit more familiar with it. By the time I entered this stretch of road in the wee hours of the morning, my legs were stiff and my lower back sore, so I decided to pull over at the next opportunity onto a shoulder that was big enough to accommodate my rig. The refreshing cold morning air filled my cab as I put her in idle, opened the door, and leapt down onto the hard earth below. My headlights carved a path ahead in the darkness, revealing all the little imperfections of the road, scarred from years of time, oil streaks, and truckers like myself. I did some light stretches and kicked off a round of jumping jacks to get the blood pumping, my weapon of choice for a quick and effective warm-up. By the time I finished, my eyes had somewhat adjusted to the darkness that blanketed the region, so you can imagine my surprise when I spotted the outline of an old beat-up Cadillac and the reflection of my rearview mirror. My brake lights were the only reason I even saw it, as it was tucked away about 100 feet or so behind me off to the left side of the road. Now, how in the hell did I not see it as I pulled up to the shoulder? It would have easily been in plain sight. But then I realized I probably wouldn't have seen it if it were trailing behind me with its headlights turned off. The very thought of this put me on high alert, and I didn't waste any time jumping back into the safety of my cab. But as I did so, an eerie feeling tugged at me from that car behind me. Once inside with the doors locked, I pumped the brake lights to get a better look at it. I could now see that the driver's side door hung open as if someone had exited the vehicle. The driver had to be somewhere in that short distance between my truck and his car. As I re-entered the highway, I spotted the stranger just feet away from my passenger's side door as he attempted to keep pace with me. My foot grew heavy on the gas as he quickly approached, carrying what appeared to be the outline of a homemade weapon, like rebar or something meticulously repurposed into the shape of a spear. The tall, pot-bellied stranger gripped the item like his life depended on it, and his body language told me everything I needed to know. Now I had two choices here. One, I could do the smart thing and gun it, hoping he wouldn't follow in pursuit. Or two, I could make sure the man wouldn't be able to follow me or anyone else unlucky enough to come across him. So I went for the second option and decided to disable that old caddy, which from the look of it wouldn't take much to do. So in my haste, I rolled to a stop and shifted into reverse, almost angered by the inconvenience of doing so under the strangest of circumstances. As I backed up and gained momentum, I angled the rear of the steel trailer to the front of that caddy. At this point, I didn't really care where the man was, as he had bigger problems to deal with by the time I was through. I succeeded in backing into that old set of wheels, hitting it hard, smashing in the right grille, taking the front tire clean off. If I didn't know any better, a smile formed on my face as I saw the stranger panic and run away from the scene. It worked. The suspect was gone. I left the area soon after and filed a police report, giving the location of the caddy. The officers thanked me for being vigilant and believed the man may have been responsible for several attacks in the area over the last year or so. Many witnesses have reported the caddy near the scene of those crimes, but somehow he was never caught in the act. Well, I suppose I'm content in knowing I disabled his ride, making it that much harder for him to continue his crime spree in the future. Though, I wish I could have disabled him as well. Well, that's my experience, and hopefully you, the listener, will never have to go through this. But if you do, don't be a hero, unless of course, you're 100% confident you can do some damage. That's all there is. Thank you, Harley. And there you have it. So next time you find yourselves out there on the open road, tip your hats to your fellow truck drivers. It's because of them we're able to live more comfortably. Always be aware of your surroundings and expect the unexpected. Thanks for listening, folks. Good night.